Hello, my name is Chloe Bruce. I've started a YouTube channel a few months ago for various reasons. One is to discuss my diagnosis of schizophrenia, which happened a couple of decades or more ago. And the other is to discuss society in Britain through this prism of my own diagnosis, which I was later diagnosed as epilepsy after grand mal seizure. And I've been discussing this in my channels, the stigma, what life is like under section in psychiatric wards in Britain, and the connected socio-economic climate here. And how a difficult situation in Britain has been going on for actually decades. And certainly when I was in my late 20s, in the late 90s, early new millennium, although I wasn't ill until my late 20s, and just before then, I was struggling with homelessness even then on a high salary, on a good high tax band. And this is because the rents were extortionately high for very poor quality buildings. And as such, I exercised my ability to go abroad. Being a journalist and academic, I worked abroad rather than sticking out in London, choosing the better quality of life in Vienna, and a job there with the Economist Intelligence Unit, where I worked for a while as an editor. And I've not really discussed the quality of life, but it presents a good quality of life with a good apartment relatively central to the centre of Vienna, on a journalist salary. And then after I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, I studied in London, that is. I went back to Vienna to study for a doctorate there so that I didn't have to encounter such difficult deadlines. And I've discussed how I had a near fatal accident when a building collapsed on me, and also how I was diagnosed separate to this with epilepsy, but fortunately it wasn't the consequences of the building. It had been maybe something that's simmering since childhood and that caught up with me that the neurologist felt after an EEG. But thankfully I've been off my anticonvulsants, that's my anti-epileptics, for a long while now, for some years, about 6 years, let's say. 6-7 years, and I've been seizure free, controlling it with my usual dose of masses of sleep, but also a slower pace of life and just good luck, really. I've been discussing, although I'm a specialist in Russian politics and business, specialising, although I'm not an economist, I've specialised in the politics, the political economy and the dynamics there of Russian natural gas politics, and I did this research from 2003. Or thereabouts, and although that's my speciality and I'm more familiar with Russia, I've been commenting on London too, and Britain too, and some of the problems you have here, and I've been explaining why there is no resolution of the housing crisis to date, and how I was homeless for 11 months, and the terrible conditions there on top of everything else. And I've discussed the reality of schizophrenia as a non-event in terms of diagnosis, because they never really know what it is, and therefore I felt that they were missing all these co-occurring conditions such as epilepsy, which can produce psychosis. And I've also talked about how this cannot be anything but a misconception, since they bring race into the equation of diagnosis, and in my case anti-Slavic notes and libel, and saying ridiculous things like I'd eaten my own excrement, which can only be a recollection of the Holocaust or other moments of genocide. Yes, I've discussed how it cannot be separate than their knowledge of my mother, as although I'm a Christian, a British Christian, I have Slavic Jewish hereditary from my mother, and they seem to suppose this magical Jewish gene gave me natural Russian language, when in fact I learned it from the age of 14 and put a lot of hard work into it, but they wanted to portray me as a complete F-up with no ability, and the wrong look for journalism, and the wrong voice. And with this allegation in my notes, I've defecated in my kitchen sink in front of a group of plumbers and police, and then ate my own excrement. I can say that this libel certainly isn't going to help anything, and I cannot say it's separate to even the government websites talking about mentally ill people as SMI, SME. In Russian means mass media, and I'm sure that a Slav amongst us knows that this is a derogatory term for a much persecuted element of society, that is historically the persecution of Slavic journalists with or without Jewish hereditary, and it cannot be anything but an unpleasant, that's why they should choose medical terms extremely carefully and consider the law. They still haven't bothered to apologise or take it out, and as such I don't see doctors anymore, and I'm going to just have to keep well without them. So today I wanted to give my thoughts on the Labour Party conference and the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and his speech. It was a long speech, and I'll just allude to small parts of it. But this is a thing that I just wanted to comment in my way as a British civilian. I hope that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, fulfilled his cultural programme a couple of days ago, saying he was planning to have a good dose of Shostakovich, Dmitri Shostakovich, the Russian composer. And as he embraced the strains and sways of this composer, this Russian composer, I thought of a beacon of light, hope, in the speech when he talked about Shostakovich as something you'd like to listen to, even though there's lots of Russian anti-Semitism emanating from Westminster and in the media. And I thought this was a moment of soft power, which many politicians feel can be a good idea. I heard a Polish politician talking about, I think the Foreign Minister of Poland talking about soft power in relation to China and the virtues. This as opposed to hard power and a pretext of war. And soft power, of course, can take many forms, and we have space programs, we have music, as he quite rightly points out, Shostakovich, and there are economics is obviously an extremely strong form of soft power. But where all else fails, we still have Russian culture as something we can love. And I know that many Russians feel as though everyone hates their culture. They're trying to cancel Russian culture, completely trying to destroy it. And that's uncalled for. And so I thought that that was a nice moment where we can think nicely about the relationship that we've often had that's very positive with Russia and other countries of the former Soviet Union. We've had many positives, good coordination in impact on sharing criminal knowledge, terrorism sharing, and I think we've had some extremely good tip-offs from Russia and vice versa about terrorist activities. There were many positives that should be remembered. But if it's too difficult, of course, we know, and I don't find it difficult, but even though I've got Ukrainian or some from Slavic, I think I have Slavic from Russia, Poland and Ukraine. And you can't cancel a culture any more than you can cancel a country and their free will. And free will is something that we have to work on here in Britain. And because obviously you can't hurt a person with their illness unless you plan to subjugate them and the poor. So as he said this, I was pleased about the effort he made to reach out to Russia at the level of soft power, in his case music. A musical person himself, he says. And he said he was a flautist, playing the flute in concerts. And St. Petersburg, the birthplace, I believe, of Shostakovich, Dmitri Shostakovich, was a place associated with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, where he spent much of his KGB career, former KGB career. And I checked online this composer just to revise parts of him. And this wonderful composer, Shostakovich, whose melodies for me are sometimes like a kind of graveyard, as he plays of oppression and struggle, and around the time of the first Russian Revolution. And as such, I don't think it's a coincidence that Keir Starmer referred to a composer, an oppressed composer, talking of Russia's struggle. And all countries have their demons, and we all feel we haven't chosen the leader. Not everyone chose the leader that's there necessarily. And I don't think Putin, of course, said, I have now 100% of the vote. No. Some people did not vote for Putin in the Russian presidential election. And as such, every country has its demons and its moments of discontent. But I don't say any justification of aggression or war on civilians at all. But it's to demonise Russia and is, of course, a fallacy. And such, it was nice to hear someone saying a positive. I'm aware from my own experiences, in light of this SMI, this SME, is severely mentally ill. It's meant to be SME, severely mentally ill. I don't know if I made that clear, but I've talked about it in a previous video. I'm aware from my own experiences how under attack you can feel for liking culture, for trying to be sophisticated or for wanting a more sophisticated way of thinking. I've talked about how I loved music as a child, and I didn't do much but repeat on the piano. And I've talked about how I can play a tune with relative pitch without the music. If I hear it once, I can reproduce it well on my right hand and somewhat on the left hand on the pianist. And I've been able to pick up any instrument and play it, so long as I didn't have to use my lungs. A flute's difficult, but if I have a tune I want to play and there's an instrument handy, I can just hear it and play it on any instrument, even if I haven't had lessons for that instrument. And I've loved music, but I chose, I thought about the performing arts also to about 13, 14, but I loved Russia, so I chose Russian studies, and I've been devoted to this topic constantly all my life, since learning it at 14, during the communist era it was. And so, for example, with this musicality, as a child, I'm talking about pain and how people stamp on culture. I had an antique record player, not an 80s record player, I mean a record player from about 1915 to 1920, one you wind up, and had a collection of records that went with it. And a family member, I've talked about my family problems, a family member and her partner, a man who went on to try and sexually abuse me one night. This particular woman, an adult at that time, started yelling, "You're weird for liking that music, you're weird." Jazz music from the crooner era. And this resentment of people who try to think without peer pressure or to be unpeer pressured. Luckily, I managed to know I loved the music. I didn't have anyone who could change my mind about that. But the same individual, when I was homeless, along with another relative, stole this antique record player that had been left at a relative's house while I was homeless, as I was dead. They took it with no remorse, no apology, even though I'd restored it to its former glory, and it's Cuban mahogany, and quite distinctive. I restored it to its former glory with my money, and was given it by a parent as part of my heritage, my culture. And the difficult thing was I was just starting to come off my anti-epileptics, and there was a risk of death by brain damage, which is what a seizure is. And at this delicate time, they were treading all over a body that luckily didn't exist, but might have, and the last thing anyone would have known is they stole my music. I'm talking about Keir Starmer. He's right. To mention culture is vital. If you think about my epilepsy, there's evidence to suggest classical music helps spare someone's seizures, and stress exacerbates them. And I feel, even though I was supposed to have child epilepsy that had gone unnoticed, I feel that if I hadn't been playing classical music every single day for hours on end, I might have had more presence for this epilepsy. It might have been more prominent, which would not have been good. And so they just appropriated this belonging. And these will never be my blood relatives again. I share nothing in common with these people at all. And when I was 16, I started music A-level, and I was given a piano for my 16th birthday, and this was taken from me as soon as I finished my A-level. And I was screamed at by my mother, who said my sister ought to have the piano instead, even though they weren't studying music and hadn't studied GCSE or A-level music. And this was taken from me at 18 when I was turfed out of the home that had this piano in. Even though it was vital for my A-level studies, ruined by her screaming, and I gave up music. I was doing 4 A-levels, and I ended up with 2.5 A-levels. I could have kept on with the music, but it's something I can do anyway, whereas learning Russian and politics would have been difficult on my own, to say the least. And Keir Starmer talked of joy, and this is about quality of life culture. And joy is precisely what some people want, but they get eaten up by other people and their jealousy. But luckily my love of music was too large, because music is large and everywhere and for everyone, and that cannot be dismantled at all. As I believe every sound is recorded in the stars above, not just by satellites that come from the future or the past or from wherever, but every sound we make, every utterance is recorded up there in space. in the cosmos. And I've talked about how my music was stolen when I was under section in hospital. Staff infiltrated the council, handed my keys to hospital staff who wouldn't let me out until they burgled me. And they stole bizarre objects, not just silverware, but my thesis, my PhD in the hard copy, some USB sticks, and they stole just kitchenware, they stole parts of my electrical products, and they stole my childhood musical compositions and some of my transcripts. And that is malice. And that malice is something we can override by sharing culture and our love of culture. But these killjoys have nothing going for them except malice. And luckily I have my music because it's in here, because it was my own. And I have it, and I'll play it to you actually. I'm not saying it's the best in the world, but it was dear to me. And next time I do the housework online, which I've been doing to prove I'm not squalid, I'll play it while I do the housework. I've got one or two things, there aren't vast numbers of them, but anyway. But I've been talking, I want to say to Keir Starmer, I can't have a piano. You've taken my piano because of this council flat. I don't know the rules. I can't inflict piano playing on my neighbours, and I can't play it for 10 minutes a day. I have to play it 5 or 6 hours a day. I want my piano back. Can you think about people having culture elsewhere? You think about someone with a piano. I thought about a clarinet, taking up the clarinet and just teaching myself the clarinet. There's still a racket, and the council's keen to find people. They're going to write sooner or later to intimidate me about my music, since they were the ones who facilitated my piano being stolen by not giving me a home. And I've said how these staff stereotype me as a Slavic Jew. Enhancement of joy should be what good psychotherapy should be about joy, about what you can get out of life anyway, not letting the enemy win. Of course, Starmer's firm words about housing, and sometimes related benefit for all, but sometimes this is related to housing, of course, were welcome. And he spoke of the basic logic that armed forces members should have a home, whether in them or out of them. But I'm unclear as to what his plan is to create these homes. He's holding his cards quite tightly close to his chest. No thanks to a noisy performance, as I would say. He talks about noisy performances in politicians. I would say spell out Rachel Reeves as the main candidate for this racket. I was such a racket going on while I was trying to listen to Keir Starmer's speech that I actually heard when he said he had played the flute for the Croydon Philharmonic Orchestra. I thought he said he'd first had to replay it lots of time, played the flute for the Morocco disco, the Morocco youth disco first. And I had to listen to it a few times because of this racket that sometimes goes on around here. Anyway, it wasn't. He played for the Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra. No mean feat. Yes, it can take nerves of steel. Anyway, so no thanks to a noisy performance by Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who was yelling so loudly I could see her tonsils at the beginning, yelling with her mouth like squarely open. I've never seen such an open mouth in a speech in all my life, making herself hoarse later on. And of course, nothing she said was anything. I was criticised the state before of nothing, but saying how bad the Tories were, very few initiatives of their own in certain parties. Yelling, Tory, Tory, Tory. All I could hear was the Tory legacy. Tories did this, Tories did that. And little meat on the bones of her actual economic policies. I don't think it's her job to just go on about the Tories. It's her job to reassure the public that they will be okay. But she didn't say that. She says it's going to get worse. Yes, and you can't just offset the past by yelling about the Tories. She has to offset the past with her policies. She has to say how we're drawing away from this dismal past. And I was alarmed when she yelled, "Bring it on," exposing her whole body, even though there had been a heckler. And she wasn't the only one to challenge someone to a fight. I have no idea why they're challenging people to a fight. Anyway, it was as though the Tory, she's sort of challenging the Tory to a fight as though they were the ones who picked the fight. The election's over. You're not having a fight with the Tories. You have to accept their right to a freedom of speech, even if you don't like it, because it's better than what you're saying in terms of technicalities of economic policies. It might just be literally absurd than what you're saying, and as such the Tories, if they've got an economist between them, are going to have to say and stamp down any sort of idea that this could be the case. If we're talking numbers, they have to be accurate. And this racket, why did she have to yell? And as I say, this was particularly irresponsible, as there had been a heckler, and other hecklers may have come in and seized their chance with that open body. Rees' speech was partly counterfactual or counter-historical anyway. If the Tories would have done this, if the Tories would have done that. It didn't happen. That's counterfactual, counter-historical. And she might have spared us her mini breakdowns, unlike Keir Starmer, who was quite calm and collected, little mini breakdowns, yelling, the worst moment of my life, or whatever. She said, yes, that her biggest nightmare, my biggest nightmare was COVID. Well, it may have been your biggest nightmare, but we shared that nightmare. All I can say is there are many facets to this nightmare. There are many, many things that are wrong about this COVID situation. Many, many things that were wrong. And all I can say to her, from what I hear from your policies, the worst is yet to come. If you think you've had your biggest nightmare, think about us. And there may be a promise from Keir Starmer to ease off austerity, but we don't know the plans to do that. And money is getting less and less and less. And they have no right to erode upon our savings just to save a welfare benefit that we didn't even get, housing. And you're going to have this done, pains to come. This is her viewpoint, that things are going to get worse. Think about winter. You feel that you can control the fuel price from London. I'm sure up to a point that if things have gone the way they are, there'll be a very large bill this winter for home-end consumer prices for households because of that spike in oil prices. And right on time, the spike in natural gas prices is going to be in winter, 6 months later, according to that equation. And we had the Middle East unrest, which caused a temporary or not oil spike and oil price hike rather. And this is going to be felt in the natural gas prices, the things that heat our boilers and our ovens in winter. And this, even with some of the pensioners, a portion of the pensioners receiving the fuel allowance because it's now means tested or the rules have changed, this is going to be enough to pay for winter. This is going to be enough for them. According to current prices, you have to make a prediction of what the fuel prices are going to be this winter to calculate the allowance. And there may be a cold weather payment going that way too, so that might offset that. But how are you going to predict the weather? And it might be interesting to hear technical discussions about how gas experts do predict, and oil experts do predict the weather, because the weather affects prices. It's futures market. How do you know the volumes and the prices this winter? It might be interesting the press actually discussed weather factor in natural gas prices and spared a thought the people in Europe who live in cold climates like Poland, and them being under pressure to avoid Putin's gas, they call it, Putin's natural gas. How are they meant to heat their homes in winter without resorting to coal or more dirty fuels? These questions might be easy for a gas engineer to answer, but we mere mortals would like more answers to this by the press, and it's no use yelling if the gas price is going to be high, because you can't control that without diplomacy. And there was hardly any diplomacy in bring it on. Sorry, I don't like that racket either. Thank you.